Hey you guys, Jerry Hill here, and I'm going to talk to you guys tonight about Sir William Blackstone. By the way, we have experienced the stomach virus this week at my work, so this is the first time I've been up since about Thursday, so just bear with me, okay? So Sir William Blackstone was an interesting guy because he lived in 1723 to 1780, and he was born 4 months after his own father died. And then Blackstone's mother passed away when William was only 12, and this made his uncle become his provider at the time. Well, as luck would have it, or whatever, he did go away to school. He did study the law, and he later met and married his wife, who was Sarah, and they met and married in 1761. And then they had 9 children. 9. So just to kind of give you a timeline of or a time period so you can relate it, he was living and working in the same time period as Benjamin Franklin. Some key points about Sir William Blackstone is he was appointed the King's Counselor and elected to the House of Commons. And then in 1770, he was knighted and appointed as a Justice of the Court. He was often in poor health. He was irritable. He was impatient when he was on the bench. And he did die at the age of 57, and that was in 1790. He died of dropsy, which is, for modern day terms, is edema. And that's 4 years after the American Revolution occurred. And a lot of people said that he had great influence in the American Revolution, just his writings, and when people were looking at the things he had written and all of that, that he had a great influence on the American Revolution. I'm not sure if he would say he did, but people now think that he did. So he had these lectures, and just to kind of give you an idea, he thought that they were just going to be a total bust, that he thought they were going to not be successful, that they weren't going to be received well, that he was not going to do well because he had not just had this great success really before that. It was kind of a mediocre looking back, even though we look and say, oh, but he was the King's Counselor, he was elected to the House of Commons, all of those things. But these lectures, the commentaries, they kind of spurred that success. So they did have immediate success despite the fact that he did doubt them. Some scholars say that he drank his way through writing these books, these commentaries or whatever, or the speeches. And so then later in England, they were published from 1755 to 1769. And Blackstone earned £14,000 for his work, which is a really good salary. American edition was printed in Philadelphia in the early 1770s. They immediately sold out, which caused a need for a second edition. Commentaries were then translated into French and German and Russian, so it shows that his berth went really wide. He had a wide influence because they were translated into all these other languages. So his lectures basically were divided into 4 books, books 1 through 4. And book 1 was The Right of Persons, a look at British government, the clergy, the royal family, marriage, children, and corporations. Basically, it was about the absolute right of individuals. Book 2 was about the right of things, or the right of people to own things. It began with, there is nothing which so generally strikes the imagination and engages the affections of mankind than the right to property. Historians say that after that was his kind of beginning stance on that he later disproves it in the entire commentary. But it's a nice thought, because there is nothing that's quite strikes creativity or affections in mankind to earn that first dollar, to own something, to find that dream. So that is true. Then book 3, Private Wrongs, much like our modern day torts, that's a lot of civil type cases that would be now. And book 4 it would be public wrongs, crimes, and punishments, including those against God and religion. Interesting facts and findings about Blackstone is some considered Blackstone's ultimate accomplishment as opening the law to so many for to whom it had been closed to them. So they thought that people lived and worked and they had benefits of the law, but they didn't actually know anything about the law. Or much like sometimes our system now in America, we may have reap the benefits, but we don't understand it exactly. And Blackstone did this for so many. He made it understandable. He opened to so many. And before that, it had been closed. So he opened the eyes of a lot of people as well. Blackstone is said to have believed that the law flowed from superior to inferior, whether that be God, monarch, or the nation. So it was kind of a top down thing. It was law was here, superior here, and then to inferior. And then some people say that he loved humanity but disliked people. Actually, I think I know some people like that right now. So I thought that was a fun quote because I can see that. A lot of people love humanity, but they don't always like what they're having to deal with. And maybe that's what Blackstone experienced as well. He despised the idea of slavery in England, and I give him huge credit for this because to own another person was simply just wrong, and he understood this early on, and he spoke against it. The flip side of his all of his different things that we find are contradiction, he didn't see anything wrong with limiting the vote to property owners. So if you didn't own property, he didn't think you should get a vote either. So some of us wouldn't have gotten to vote in the election if we don't own property. But that's kind of an interesting little fact and a little contradiction as well. His influence was wide. We said that, and it was pretty deep because the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, a lot of people credit the phrasing on those documents. They credit it to Blackstone and his speeches and his commentaries. They say that the use of unalienable rights and all of that type phrasing came from Blackstone and his works. Thomas Jefferson had a love-hate relationship with Blackstone in his works. He said, Blackstone's works glorify the systems I have devoted my life to fight. He also listed Blackstone's commentaries as required reading for law students. And then for those of you who love Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton and the Federalists were also heavily influenced by Sir William Blackstone. And Abraham Lincoln, there are different renditions of how he became familiar with Blackstone's works or how he got copies of those to read. But the culmination of all the different tales is that he did read Blackstone and he was heavily influenced by Blackstone. But after that, we see that Blackstone, his popularity among people who really study the law, it started to fade. And so Sir William Blackstone was, like we said, a contradiction in his spoken work, his written work, because like most of us, or especially this girl, he was imperfect. And so sometimes he was figuring it out as he went. Sometimes he had deeply strong convictions that he was very much against. And then sometimes he loved his country, though. I mean, so things contradicted themselves when he would work it or write it or speak it. But he did lose, like we said, influence after Abraham Lincoln, but he was successful. And that, as a matter of fact, there's a statue of his likeness on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. And this just goes to show that what he did for the judiciary process, he had wide influence. People loved him or they hated him, but he still had the influence. And they realized that he, even though lived only to 57, he had a lot of knowledge to share with each other. And then he influenced our greatest nation and our most treasured documents. Like I said earlier, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, those things are some of our most treasured documents, and they're our cornerstone to everything and to our society, to our nation, to everything that comes after it. And so Blackstone is given credit for seeing how important those things were. And then our forefathers were actually, they saw that maybe they didn't agree with everything he said, but his influence was great. And what he thought about people as far as their liberties, that was important. So that's my story about Sir William Blackstone, and I think he would have been an interesting guy to know in person. I hope you guys have a great week. Bye.